Hello, video is to discuss the prerequisites for installing Autodeploy in a lab environment. I'll start with the DHCP server options. So on your DHCP server, in this case my DHCP server is also my domain controller, my DNS server. This is a lab environment, so most of the services are hosted by a single machine. It also hosts my TFTP server. So as you can see, there's a scope that's been configured. Autodeploy requires a couple of particular scope options. These are 66, which is your boot server host name, and it's the same as your TFTP server name. In my case, it's all the same server. And also option 67 is the Bootfile Name, and that's always for Autodeploy, it's the same name. And this is it here. Now this is something that can and probably should be pre-configured prior to you actually installing or attempting to boot your first host. And the same with DNS. This is something that can be pre-configured. DNS is not as required. However, if you want your host to come into their vCenter by the names that you're going to eventually call them, this is something I'd highly recommend. You can ensure pre-configure both of these options. So what we have here is the scope options. 66 and 67 have been pre-configured. They point to my TFTP server, which is all hosted by this particular machine here. So these are the DHCP server settings and scope options. Down in DNS, I've already created some A records. These records are going to be used once the host that has this particular IP reservation is booted. It's going to automatically resolve to the name ESX1, and when you add it into your vCenter, you'll see rather than adding it by IP address, it adds it by name. This will be more clear later on when you actually see the first host boots. But in your environment, just remember, you can create your address reservations in advance. You may have to find some MAC addresses to use. Now, what we're going to do is before booting the first host, we're going to set the host to use this particular MAC address. We're going to use some nested ESXi hosts in order to do this. And it's an option to set the MAC address, and that way we don't have to go back and forth and continuously change the options here. Although if you're using physical hosts, that is how you would do it. You would come in here and you would modify these. Okay, so going back, so the prerequisite DHCP server we've discussed, DNS we've discussed, the Autodeploy service. If you go to your vCenter server, now in this case I have used because this is a lab environment, my vCenter runs all of these services on a single host. So I've got my SSO, my web client, inventory service in vCenter. You can see I'm running 5.5. I've also installed Autodeploy on here. You can just go ahead and accept the defaults. If you're installing in a lab environment, you may want to modify the size of your repository in a production environment. You may also want to install these services on different servers in a production environment depending on size. But as this is a lab, they can all be installed on the same vCenter without an issue. Once done, if it's done completely, you will see the VMware Autodeploy Waiter service is now, there it is. It is now installed and running. Additionally, you're going to see the plugin for Autodeploy here at home, and this is going to come in very shortly. We're going to see what this is used for. So we've discussed the Autodeploy service. It can be installed anywhere. You'll see the Autodeploy Waiter service and the Autodeploy plugin, which we've discussed. Now the TFTP server configuration, this is what's going to host your boot file, and it's what's basically going to make all of this work together. And it's pretty cool what you can do with it. I'm using WinAgent's TFTP server. So I've got a local repository which I've configured, and I'm going to go ahead and just delete the whole thing. in order to show you guys exactly how you get to this point. So I've got my TFTP server configured. First, you manage your repository. You can create a new one. I'm just going to delete this so we can start from scratch. So we're going to go server, virtual TFTP, manage repository. We're going to add one. I've already just created an empty folder called WSVC, and I'm just going to call it WSVC. Okay. The defaults are fine. You don't need to change the access permissions or anything like that, but you do need to come into manage request forwarding. So what I want is an IP range. Now you may remember that I was using 192.168.1.240 was where I started, and I will just give a range of 10 IP addresses, and I'm going to set it to use this particular boot folder. So just so you're clear, here are the IPs. I'm starting at 240, 241, 242, and I've got the same a matching A record for each one, 240 and so on up to 244. I'm going to move it all the way up to 250 in case I want to add some hosts later, but this is enough to get started. Now, so it's going to, right now if a host boots, it's going to be directed to an empty boot folder. So this is where it this comes into play, the Autodeploy plugin. We want to download the TFTP boot zip. We're going to download it and we're going to drop it in that folder location that I prepared. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and save this to the network location which I have prepared, which is on the TFTP server. USVC, we're going to save that. Going to take a couple minutes to get there. Now it's zipped by default, so we're going to just go ahead and unzip it. Okay, the boot files are unzipped. I'll just get rid of the zip file, the original zip file. We don't really need that anymore. And you may remember from the DHCP server option, the scope option, the boot file name. You can now see that boot file name here in that repository. That was right here. It is this one. So now it's going to boot. The client will get the appropriate reservation. It'll hit the TFTP server. The TFTP server will use the rule to direct it to the correct folder. In this case, it's this folder, which will cause it to start downloading this boot file. And eventually, once we've got all our rules and everything configured, it will get pulled into the correct vCenter. So with all of that configured, I also noted here, as I discussed, you can use this to boot between multiple vCenters. If let's say you've got different sites, but you've got them all configured to use the same TFTP server, or in a lab environment where I've got a DR location, I've got a prod location, they're connected with SRM, you can still have them both booting using the same DHCP server, and then your rules are going to split it off from there and get it to the correct vCenter. And so you'll need a different folder for each vCenter that you're going to want to boot from. And so the next thing we need to go on to will be the rules, and we'll take care of that in the next video. But at this point, all your prerequisites should be in place.